Hey, I'm Mike Lucine back with a brand new mic. Okay, so that should help with the audio issues that we've been having to start things off. And I'm here for your training camp update for Tuesday, August 5th. Now we're going to start with fantasy football. It's a fun game, and I don't want to be one of these old time gatekeepers. I'm not one of those guys. Okay, I know that I'm part of the old guard, and I'm doing this collaboration with Walter Football, which was the first website on the internet. Um, but I know that a lot of people know a lot about football, and it's fun to share your opinions, right? Because we don't know a lot of things as absolute fact. We're just making educated guesses and projections. But when you go on Twitter and social media, you see a lot of really weird, dicey information. There's sort of like this new guard of fantasy football analysts. I don't know what you want to call them, people who like fantasy football and think they know a lot about it. And some of their views are kind of, not correct, I guess. And we're going to kind of jump into that today and talk and start with the big news with Kyren Williams. Okay, so first off, a lot of victory laps were going on with Kyren Williams today on Twitter. Because if you haven't seen, he signed a 3-year, $33 million extension. Now, let's get into what this deal actually means. First off, I don't think anybody thought that Kyren Williams wasn't going to start for the Rams this year. He's clearly their starting running back. We've talked about Jarquez Hunter and Blake Corum here in these camp updates, but that's because we know if something happens to Kyren Williams, an injury, that one of those guys is probably going to have a lot of value, and we know that because Sean McVay has a long history of playing one back, right? So even if it's Cam Akers, he'll have value. Whoever's playing that given week is going to have value in that Rams offense. So people are speculating on why did Kyren Williams sign now? What does it mean? Let me just clear things up for you. He was the starter. We could make a reasonable assumption that he was going to be the starter after this year. So why did the Rams sign him now? Okay, he's a unrestricted free agent after this year. But for those of you who don't know, running backs have really sort of been devalued in the NFL. And so the way it usually works is you've got a running back on a rookie contract. Now, if you draft a running back in the first round, that's a 4-year deal with a 5th-year option for the team. Okay. You saw Najee Harris did not have his 5th-year option picked up. He was a first-round back. Every other rookie player outside of the first round, so running backs included, has a 4-year contract. And after that 4 years is over, they reach unrestricted free agency. Now, NFL GMs have really smartened up with how they manage running backs, and it's unfair to these guys, okay? But what's happening is you get a guy for 4 years, then you can franchise him. That's a 5th year. If his wheels haven't fallen off, you maybe franchise him a second time. Now you're at 6 years. Say you drafted the guy at 22 years old. Now he's 28. You usually let him go if he hasn't broken down already. All right, so why did the Rams re-sign Kyren Williams right now? And wow, a 3-year deal worth $33 million. Let's talk about that. First, this is not the National Hockey League or other sports where 3 years, $33 million means each year he's going to be making $11 million for 3 years. That's not the case with a lot of NFL contracts. Now, we haven't seen how this is structured yet. I would be willing to bet, though, that this is actually a 2-year deal. Okay, that the Rams will save money on if they cut him if he's not good in that 3rd year. So why did they sign that deal now? Well, I'm gonna answer that question by showing you some edge rusher contracts. Okay, if you're looking at this screen, you might be thinking, why in the world is this guy showing us edge rusher contracts? Well, I'll show you why. Okay, Max Crosby right here. He signed a deal on March 5th of this year. An extension that made him the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. Look at that. But you might already be noticing, wait, if he was the highest paid non-quarterback on March 5th, why are there 3 pass rushers that are listed as making more money per year than him? Well, it's because of the order that they signed. Okay, now, Danielle Hunter, this is a shorter term deal, okay? But look, he signed on March 19th, the extension on March 19th, and he's making a little bit more than Max Crosby, almost the same amount, but a little bit more than Max Crosby. And then Myles Garrett, okay, became the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL because he signed the deal later. TJ Watt was just in the news, right? He just signed that extension. Look at TJ Watt. He's now making more per year than Myles Garrett, okay? Less guaranteed money, but still right up there with Myles Garrett. Any idea what Micah Parsons is holding out for here? You know that Micah Parsons wants to be at the top of this list. And the top of this list, now we can debate how good these 4 players and Micah Parsons are, and we're not going to do that right now. My point is they're getting paid essentially by the order that they sign. Okay, so you can guarantee that Micah Parsons, right now, his agent is saying, all right, well, Myles Garrett just signed and TJ Watt just signed, and we want a deal that's going to be comparable, if not just maybe a slight bit more than what they are making. And that's why, he has this contract dispute going on with the Cowboys. All right, so what does this have to do with Kyren Williams? Sorry, I love football, and I know this doesn't have a lot to do with fantasy football right here, but Kyren Williams, the 2022 draft class. Remember, I said there are 4-year deals if you get drafted outside of the top round. Kenneth Walker, set to be a free agent at the end of the year. Tyler Algier. Now, if you're in dynasty leagues, that might be a guy to go out and stash. I could see him getting a deal where he's a starting running back somewhere else next year. James Cook. Right? Everybody knows about how he's holding in right now. He's looking for a new deal. Breece Hall. Rachaad White, he might not get that big of a deal, but he's still going to be someone who's out there. Pacheco. His deal's over after this year. He's going to be in the mix to get paid. Dameon Pierce is not. The Texans ran him into the ground as a rookie. Brian Robinson's got a little bit of value. Okay, he's a free agent after this year. Jaylen Warren, I know you fantasy guys don't love Jaylen Warren, but the guy's great in pass protection. NFL teams are going to like him more than fantasy football people. All right, so my point here is the 2022 rookie class, Kyren Williams wasn't even listed on this list, it's an old list, is filled with a bunch of guys who have expiring contracts after this year. And so by signing Kyren Williams to a deal right now, you see where I'm going with this, right? They no longer have to look at the deal that James Cook eventually signs, or the deal that Breece Hall eventually signs, or the deal that Kenneth Walker eventually signs. And they don't have to say, all right, well, we have to top that deal by a little bit. Okay? By signing him now, the Rams are getting out ahead of that. So if you can imagine this list for this group of running backs that I just mentioned, you're probably going to see Kyren Williams down here with Max Crosby. Okay, I mean, he's obviously making a lot. Edge rushers get paid more than running backs. But my point is, these other backs who I just mentioned after Kyren Williams are probably going to get paid a little bit more strictly because they're signing their deal later. Okay, so Kyren Williams is locked in as the starter there. That's not news, okay? There are people victory lapping, talking about all kinds of nonsense on Twitter. Look, that's the deal with the Kyren Williams deal. Why it got done now. His role was never in jeopardy. his role will not be in jeopardy. But you still want to look at those Rams handcuff running backs, especially if some clarity starts to show up and which one of the two between Hunter and Corum are going to be the primary backup, because they are going to have value in weeks that Kyren Williams is injured. All right, my long-winded talk about Kyren Williams, but that was the major news for today. The other NFC news, Cole Kmet got injured during a joint practice, but it sounds like it's minor, so not a big deal there. I've already moved Colston Loveland up above, ahead of Travis Kelce, though, and Mark Andrews. He's really been good, and I'll tell you, as good as Tyler Warren's stats were last year in college, Loveland played on a team that just didn't throw the ball the last few years. Their offensive line wasn't great at pass blocking. After they lost J.J. McCarthy, they had issues at quarterback. And Colston Loveland's a much better route runner than Tyler Warren. So I've got Warren ranked ahead of Loveland in my redraft rankings. And I've got them pretty much tied when it comes to dynasty value. Although you might want to note that Colston Loveland is 2 years younger if you're playing dynasty. All right. So let's move on. The other news for camp today. Mason Taylor, rookie tight end for the New York Jets. High ankle sprain. So he's going to be out for a little while. That's unfortunate. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. High ankle sprains are kind of a pain. I would look at his recovery. I'm not a doctor, but I mean, these things usually take a few weeks minimum. So Mason Taylor's still in that sort of late tight end 2, early tight end 3 range, but that's just something to note. He's out with a high ankle sprain right now. Travion Henderson, you've heard me talk about him a lot. Okay, there are some things that I've mentioned. If you've gone back and listened, if you've been following along with us, or you've gone back and listened to these camp updates, some of the news that's been coming out, I've already told you about. I already either speculated or was kind of ahead of it. Travion Henderson should be a 4th-round pick in redraft fantasy football leagues. I mentioned on Walt's show when we were doing live streaming drafts, I mentioned it here. Rookie running backs see the field quicker when they're able to pass protect. That is Travion Henderson's maybe strongest trait. Okay, he's going to see the field early. He catches passes. He is a strong value in the 4th round of your redraft leagues. I don't care if it's best ball. I don't care if it's just a lineup league. You should not let him fall out of the 4th round. And he's continuing to have a good camp. Now, we have to talk about A.D. Mitchell. I talked about A.D. Mitchell a little bit earlier, and I said I've been ahead on some things. Alexander Madison, there was an article today about him, possibly having a role in that offense. And I told you about that a week ago. But A.D. Mitchell is sort of the opposite of this. Okay, I had heard that he wasn't really developing a lot of chemistry with Anthony Richardson. I had heard that he did have that chemistry with Daniel Jones, but I've strongly sort of speculated that team needs to start Anthony Richardson. It's a GM and a head coach they're trying to save their jobs this year. Daniel Jones might get them to 8 wins or 9 wins, but they need Anthony Richardson to show development in order to sort of make the playoffs and show that they are going somewhere long term. So I think that Richardson's going to start. And now, from what I've heard, A.D. Mitchell in a joint practice today with against the Baltimore Ravens was completely dominant. Now, how does this impact him in fantasy? Well, if you can still get him late in best ball or late in redraft, I mean late, like 14th round or on, then I think you have to do that. Okay, this is encouraging news. It's just training camp, but this guy, it was a 2nd-round pick last year. Some people thought he could go in the 1st round. I heard that maybe he had some character stuff that might have moved him down to the 2nd round, but he was dominant today. My concern for that passing offense is this. The most actionable sort of tidbit that I'm taking out of this is I have to downgrade Josh Downs just a little bit. And I love Josh Downs. And if last year when I was on Walt's show, I said Josh Downs was my guy for that year, and he delivered. Okay, but here's the problem. What is the best possible outcome for this season for Anthony Richardson? I mean the best possible outcome. Now, what if I said last year's amazing MVP year for Lamar Jackson? You'd say that's crazy, because that is crazy, right? Yeah, I think the ceiling for Anthony Richardson is probably, one of Lamar Jackson's sort of still really good years, but not last year. That would be a pretty amazing jump. But let's take last year, where Lamar Jackson had by far more passing touchdowns than he'd ever had in his career. He had by far more passing yards than he'd ever had in his career. And still, if you take a look, by the way, this website is terrific. fftoday.com, great for looking at stats, and always sort by fantasy points per game. Okay, we'll get into that in one of our strategy series shows that's upcoming. But if you look here at the fantasy points per game last year, Zay Flowers was his top fantasy receiver. 17 games, 12.3 points per game. Now, this has him listed at 37, which would be a wide receiver 4. Realistically, he was more like wide receiver 34 or 35, right? You're not going to count one game from Tyrell Shavers, and I think there's one more up here, sort of outlier that you have to throw away. But with all of those numbers, Lamar Jackson essentially had a back-end wide receiver 3, right? The top 36 receivers are wide receivers 1, 2, and 3. 25 to 36 are wide receiver 3. And Mark Andrews is sort of a mid to back-end tight end 1. And that's it. So now we look at this Colts passing game, and again, Anthony Richardson, his legs are going to be a part of this offense for his entire career. It's going to be, if he ends up being a great quarterback, his legs are going to be a big reason why. But look at the targets in that passing game. Tyler Warren's going to be a big factor there. He wasn't there last year. Michael Pittman's healthy. And Josh Downs was really good last year when he came back from that training camp injury. So if you wanted to say, all right, Tyler Warren will be a tight end 1 somewhere in there, and then one of those other receivers could be top 24, top 36, if Anthony Richardson has a great year. All right, well, you've got Downs, you've got Pittman, you've got Alec Pierce, who you know is going to have a couple of big games. And now if A.D. Mitchell becomes a factor, it's not that one of those guys can't emerge and be a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3. It's just the cost of taking Josh Downs in the 6th round or the 7th round or even the 8th round is now getting a little bit less appealing if we're factoring in a potential A.D. Mitchell breakout, right? Because you'd rather take a guy in the 14th, 15th round, like A.D. Mitchell, if he gets there. His ADP is going to skyrocket after today. And take the shot that he's the guy who breaks out, because it's only costing you a 14th or 15th round pick, instead of taking Downs in the 7th or 8th, right? If you're doing that, now you might be taking him over Matthew Golden or Micah Ibuka or someone in that range. So I think Josh Downs is going to have to be bumped down about a round or 2 for me if this A.D. Mitchell drumbeat continues. But that was certainly big news today. And it's just one joint practice, but certainly encouraging for him. A couple other minor news. items here before we end this. Troy Franklin. You heard me talk about Troy Franklin. You heard me say he was off to a strong camp in Broncos camp. He's continued that. This is a player who we thought might be a second or third round pick. And when he was in the draft, in the 2024 NFL draft, he fell to the fourth round, early in the fourth round, but didn't really do much last year. Couldn't see the field. He was buried. Remember, they drafted the 27-year-old rookie last year, Vele, and he was playing over him, although they're much different players. This year, Troy Franklin's taken a huge step forward. And if you're a college football fan, you watched Oregon, you already know who he is. He's getting very interesting in the end of best ball drafts. You heard me talking about Jacorian Bennett and how he was the Raiders' best cover corner last year. And he was not playing with the starters when they had their scrimmage game. I said this has fantasy relevance because the Raiders' cornerbacks without Jacorian Bennett are Eric Stokes and Darian Porter. He's a talented third-round rookie, but he's raw. That could be really bad for this defense, which is really good when your offense runs a lot of plays, as Chip Kelly does, okay, and the defense is giving up a lot of points. So anyway, I'm bringing this up again because Jacorian Bennett got traded last night to the Eagles. He's not even there. He's not even a possibility to be in that lineup now. And if you listen to the show, I don't remember if it was yesterday or the day before, but I was just talking about this. Well, this isn't news to you, okay? You weren't surprised by that. And then the last thing here, and this isn't really fantasy relevant other than it's, sort of interesting. Shedeur Sanders is going to start the first preseason game for the Cleveland Browns, and he's probably going to play a lot. Hey, Kenny Pickett is still injured. He's not playing, and they're not going to play Joe Flacco. They just signed Tyler Huntley, actually, just to sort of fill some of those second half snaps and get them out of the preseason. Now, I'm not backtracking that you should not be drafting Shedeur Sanders in your fantasy leagues unless you're in a dynasty league and you have really deep rosters and it's the 5th or 6th round. What I will say is for him, this is a big opportunity because he does have the chance to change the narrative if he goes out and just completely dominates. So it is an interesting preseason storyline that we'll be keeping an eye on this week. And hey, if he has a good game, maybe he could get himself bumped up that depth chart. One good game probably wouldn't do it, but right now he's 4th on that quarterback depth chart. Not great, but something to keep an eye on. So that'll do it for today's Camp Notes. I'll be back again tomorrow with some more Camp Notes. I'll be on Walt's show tomorrow night as well, the After Dark show, and I'll be starting the Fantasy Football Strategy series where we kind of get into some strategy rather than just kind of updating you on notes and changing ADPs. So keep a lookout for those things. Thanks again for checking this show out again. And thank you for listening to my old man rant about Kyren Williams and what that deal today meant. I'll catch you next time.